We're going to talk now about why the world needs Canada and what specifically the world needs from Canada. We're starting the conference with two non-Canadian perspectives on this question because they say that the last thing the fish in the water talk about is the water that they're in. So sometimes we need a few fish from outside of the water to tell us about the water that we're in, and to help us reflect and to provoke us, and to ensure that we don't end up in mindless and self-indulgent navel-gazing, but that we actually benchmark ourselves against real truths in the world and our relationship to them. And so we're delighted both to have heard from Madame Georgieva and for her agreement to join us in this conversation. And she's going to be joined by Dr. Bhattacharya from Bangladesh, who's flown here for this event. Many of you will already know of him, and there'll be a detailed bio on your app. But let me just say that Dr. Bhattacharya is by training a macroeconomist and public policy analyst. He was the founding head of the Center for Policy Dialogue in Bangladesh. I'm told earlier this week he referred to himself as a think tank wala. So that's a designation of a first on this stage. Most recently, Dr. Bhattacharya has distinguished himself as the chair of Southern Voice, which is a coalition of some 45 or 50 think tanks from around the developing world, from South Asia, Africa, Latin America, who have gathered together to provide a constant stream of contribution, intellectual contribution, to the post-MDG agenda, and now to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals. He has also served as his country's ambassador to the UN in Geneva, including to the World Trade Organization, so brings lots of background to all this. Here's how we're going to proceed. We have about an hour. I'm going to spend about 20 or 30 minutes having a bit of a conversation with these two panelists, and then we'll hand it over to you. There'll be no live questions from the floor. You'll have to go to the Slido app or the Slido on your mobile web browser, and you can enter questions there, and then they'll be crowd voted up or down, and I'll get some way of identifying which is the most pressing question in the crowd to put to our panelists. So we'll begin. Dr. Bhattacharya, let's start, if you can, on some reflections on what you heard from Madame Georgieva, and how kind of your big kind of takeaways from that speech.
Thank you. Let me start by thanking CCIC for this unique honor to be at this opening plenary today in this great conference. And I'm so happy to see many friends around here, and I'm ready to make new friends. It's an unique, moment of time in Canada, as has been mentioned by Madame Georgieva, and it was a very, very inspiring, influencing, and innovative speech from the minister. I think so. So I take those points. But I'm a bit worried as well, Mr. Moderator, that you are going to play a good guy and a good cop and a bad cop, and you put me there. That now there have the good cop, and then the bad cop is over here to give you a fish out of water perspective in certain sense. But let me handle the situation. I'm really inspired by Madame Georgieva's speech, as all of you are. The decibel of applaudissement is I think, the empirical, verifiable indicator for that. And I must say the point she has raised, that we have achievements, but we still have an unfinished agenda. And the poverty situation, as she has painted, is really, really challenging in many ways. Having said that, also the four points you have mentioned, Madam, those regarding the various 4 points, the internal malgovernance or the war conflict or the population issue or the climate issues, these are all very pertinent. But my point would be that we should not be confusing, symptoms with reasons. So when you talk about conflicts, is it a symptom or the reason of the problem? Whether these conflicts, whether they have arisen because of, say, for example, global malgovernance. The issues which we have in Syria is not an outcome of the Syrian population. It is not a matter of their choice. It is the global powers. They have arbitrarily decided to intervene. We believed in regime change policies in various places. We believed in preemptive strikes. And as a result, we destabilize situations around the world, and then we cry that it's like that. You know, I remember a situation when a boy came to the court and said that he killed his parents, and when the court wanted to put him to jail, the boy cried, "I'm orphan." You see, you create the crisis, and then you say that we are dealing with a crisis, and that is. So my humble point is that we should not confuse reasons, the real underlying reasons with the symptoms which we see. We are facing a world which is now an autopilot which doesn't know where it is going. And not everybody has a parachute at this moment. So we are seeing that the rule-based multilateral system fragmenting like anything, and there is nobody, and big powers are taking arbitrary actions, violating all the conventions which we have built up over the decades. And so that is one of the major reasons why we see so many issues, and there is lack of concerted action. And that is why SDG is so important, with an universal targets and goals, and will bind us together, and possibly Canada will be the thread.
Dr. Bhattacharya, that's a very good segue to a first theme of our conversation I wanted to turn to. You've called it global malgovernance. I wanted to call it global institutional collapse. It strikes me that we are at a time when...
Guests are supposed to be more polite.
I suppose. We're at a time when the mechanisms for global collective problem solving seems to be exhibiting levels of fragility entirely out of proportion to the nature of the problems that the globe is facing. Madam Georgieva, can you reflect a bit on the global institutional challenge we face, with a particular view on, therefore, what for Canada? I mean, Canada is a small country, although it's got a certain orientation is making it distinctive in the world today. What is the relationship to this question of global institutional fragility to deal with the issues and the agenda you have laid out?
Well, I would caveat before I get into the answer with a clarification about myself. I am relentless optimist. And I believe that when we look at the world today, we have to recognize the severity of the problems. We have to recognize that the multilateral system is not strengthening in face of these problems. But we also have to recognize that when there is a vacuum, it doesn't stay like this. Take the issue of climate change. We have done the right thing as a world community with the Paris Agreement. There are some that are more committed, there are some that are less committed. But if you look at the ability for all to act, what is action being driven by? It is driven by people, municipalities, businesses, and this action is everywhere. It was very interesting to hear in New York during UNGA, your neighbor to the south, businesses and municipalities saying, we are going to meet our commitment under the Paris Agreement. So my first point is that we do see the emergence of compensatory mechanisms, and the question is how to make the best out of it. In my area, development finance, there is a multiplicity of factors, not necessarily best coordinated, but there is a sense among, for example, the development banks that we ought to come together. And we ought to mobilize our financial muscle to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And that is actually quite remarkable. Of course, there is competition and whatnot, but we come together, for example, on the issue of forced displacement and migration. We called a meeting with the European Investment Bank, and I can tell you, I didn't know who would show up, how successful it would be. It was an amazingly successful meeting because the problem is so pressing that there is no place to hide. So I think we need to be looking for these positive forces and doing everything we can to reinforce them. Because if we say gloom and doom, self-fulfilled prophecy. I have a reason to be optimistic also because of the youth. What I see in investing, because I deal with money, so my interest is money going in the right direction? What I see in investing today with the younger generation coming on impact investing is incredible. It's not going to be the way it used to be, for sure, with young people stepping up. They demand to know where their money goes and what good it does. And we at the bank now are innovating in this area. We issued our first social impact bond for Palestinian youth to get young people to work. Some years ago, we issued the first green bond, first ever. Today, we have 10 billion in green bonds, but the world green bond market is way over 100 billion. It has increased significantly. So again, I'm not giving you the kind of criticism that I think you expected to get from my answer, but it is because I believe we have so much to do that we have to concentrate on doing it. Can I just end with one thing?
Please.
In my life, I have been very fortunate to do many things in my life. And I learned one lesson about leadership. Every time you have a tough nut to crack and you need to mobilize people forward, you would face those that are with you, minority. Those that are against you, also minority, but very loud, very loud. And majority, what does the majority do? They sit on the bench. They wait to see what is going to happen. The mistake we often make is to concentrate on trying to convince these loud, hateful voices to shut up. They won't. What we always have to do for success, concentrate on those who believe in a positive change. Empower them. Work with them so more people get off the bench to join them. And that is the contextual on my answer.
Dr. Bhattacharya wants to get in.
If I have to, you see, regarding optimism, I don't think that we need to tell people to be optimists because they are optimists. That's why they are fighting poverty. That's why they are fighting the climate change impact. That's why they are fighting all other conflict spillovers negative over there. So I don't think there's really people who are really below the poverty line or in low-income country, which are at the receiving end of all the malgovernance, both within the country and abroad, is over there. So I think that is not the point at all. The point is, are we taking on board the situation arising in the world which helps or hinder to deliver our common objective? That is the point which we are having here. So in that sense, is the current, according to you, the collapse of the global institutions or the rule-based system, the multilateralism, is a hindrance or not? For that matter, is the World Bank playing the role in the right way or not? Is it giving voice to the new countries or the new shareholders who are supposed to be part of the voting process within the World Bank? And we have not seen those processes to go and the emerging economies to get their voices over there, which was there in the early 2005, 2006, those discussions on other reorganizing the shareholding status, we don't see those reforms. We don't see those reforms in United Nations. We don't see those in the WTO at this moment, and the Doha development round is going nowhere. And regarding the climate talks, the less is talked about, the better it is at this moment, possibly. So my whole point is that where do we stand from here and where do we go? Now, you have been asking this question at the very beginning, and I have seen that on this point, is that what the world expects from Canada.
Is there an agenda for not only the government of Canada, but even civil society that's implicit in your view?
Yes, very much.
Of what's happening?
But let me be very humbly rephrase the question.
Fine.
It is not what world wants from Canada. It is the way what Canada wants to be in the world, in order the world to be good, prosperous, and safer for Canada to come around. I think there is a totally different causality over here. It's not that the world what wants for Canada, but what Canada wants from to play a role, what type of role to make the world more prosperous, peaceful, and over there. So let me target it around. Now, we are at a very interesting moment in Canada at this moment. To start with, you have a new government with new enthusiasm, a fantastic, bold policy on feminist policies, and most importantly, and as an economist, I must say that you are in a very sound state of macroeconomic variables at this moment. Your growth rate is going to supersede United States growth rate this year. Your growth rate in trade is better than any other OECD country at this moment. The FDI flow is much more faster at this moment. So Canada comes with a very sound situation or the fundamentals at this moment. But at the same time, you have your neighborhood problems. We can see that. We see the constraints. So being optimist, but also being realistic so there's less disappointment. Let me highlight a couple of issues over here. The first one, where Canada, in order to play the role of an honest broker, global leader with convening power, needs to fix its assistance policy. The ODA, Canada has now 0.2% of its GNI, which is less than the average of the OECD, which is 3.6. There are 7 countries which has reached the 1% of the GNI. United Kingdom, with a less per capita income and with a conservative government, is doing much better than Canada at this very moment, as we know. And if you look at the Canadian assistance policy, it is not about the volume. It is about the quality of the aid which is going out. If you look at the CGD indicator at this moment, Canada ranks 17th out of the 27 countries in the OECD, number 17, going down from 9 to 17, you see, over the last decade. The issue is, if you look at where is the Canadian quality of aid and assistance, the issue is, it is not about aid anymore, as rightly said, that it is about other non-aid financial inputs, trade, investment, and other things which has come into that. Canada's ranking in trade, security, on other policies are all much below than it is below over 20 in most cases out there. The single largest important area where Canada does good is on migration policy. Canada does good in migration policy. Even on peacekeeping, it's not so good. So Canada, with its contribution to peacekeeping, is now at a historical low. So it is how we will like to see the changes which have to come to Canada in this case. The number 2 is the trade issue. The international trade system is going nowhere, as I mentioned. We are approaching the ministerial meeting of WTO at the end of the year in Buenos Aires. What is Canada going to take there? Canada has given one single largest inspiring moment in the recent past, the CETA agreement with the European Union. Fantastic. One must congratulate. I still remember your trade minister was in tears at this moment. I loved her for that. So you have to feel for trade with heart, not only with your mind. That's how it goes. So TPP and others, Canada has to bring on the table on international trade. On climate change, yes, you are trying to do it within the countries. Canada remains one of the largest per capita consumption of natural resources. Minister you mentioned as well on adaptation. But where is mitigation? Adaptation is done by the coastal poor in Bangladesh, but mitigation has to be done by the Canadian citizens. And that is where it has to come in, and not only those $2.6 billion which will go to the climate fund. I can go on all those issues. The most important thing over there is that it is the way, as a middle power, Canada is going to reinvent itself. You know, you were telling, I listened to the ministers and they say, Canada is back. Give us the sign that Canada is back. We are waiting for the signs so that Canada is back. And that is where we are going to be with you on that particular cases as it goes. Show that Canada can play both hardball and softball at the same time. It can be with targeting with the women, but with all vulnerable people at the same time. It can be at the same time play aid policy, but not forget the other complementary issues in the global systemic concerns which is there. We believe in Canada. It will be delivered. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you for the rousing agenda of action. Be careful what you ask for. Can I spend a few minutes on one of the issues that you put on the table, which is on ODA. This is an issue you can imagine of real interest to this group. Madam Georgieva, can you kind of reflect a bit on the issue that Dr. Bhattacharya has put on the table with respect to Canada and ODA? And in the context of the broader question about whether ODA matters anymore at all. I mean, we've talked about the trillions of dollars of need. It's clear that ODA is a drop in that bucket. Everyone is saying now it's all about impact investing and innovative finance and remittance flows and FDI. Does ODA matter? How does it matter? And therefore what for Canada? Is that where it should be putting its bet in relation to its scarce fiscal resources?
Well, if you look at the history and evidence, yes, it does matter. Take China. China in '87 had 660 million poor people. Now they have 25 million. They have used development assistance very effectively. You know, look at Vietnam. There are case after case after case where when there is a meeting of minds, you have a responsible governance in a country and you have development assistance programs, they make a huge difference. I have traveled to many places where official development assistance is making a tremendous difference, sustained difference in the lives of people, creates the capacity to educate kids, the infrastructure to reach markets, the ability to create jobs, so it matters. But it matters when it is done well. And in that sense, the quality of aid is as important as the quantity of aid. And it matters tremendously if it is a platform to mobilize domestic resources and to mobilize private finance on scale. So, not because I work for the World Bank, because I have seen the importance of having that combination of money, expertise, learning from others. I have seen something we learned at the bank in China being then taken to Ethiopia in land management. That really matters, and that transmission line of development cooperation, if we focus on that, it is done well, it matters. And in that sense, I think that there has been a global agreement that there should be financing on scale. We all have to strive to reach it. There is also tremendous individual generosity and more company generosity. And what we see is that when we align, when we have, say, the bank, the foundations, private sector working together, there are creative solutions and they can be put to scale. I'm thinking in health, what we have done together. We also need to recognize that even if we triple development assistance, of course it's not going to be enough. So we have to think of development assistance differently. Can it be to blend it, yes. Can it be connecting funding that individually would not make a distance, but this glue makes it possible to turn around a situation? And can we emphasize more this sharing of experience and especially transmitting south to south, something that for quite some time we didn't pay enough attention. I have many stories, actually from Bangladesh. My favorite story is Bangladesh adaptation to climate change. there was very clearly a huge economic downside of floods, especially to agriculture. So communities said, well, we have chicken, water comes, chicken die. So what did they do? They switched to
Ducks.
Ducks. Water comes, ducks swim. I'm sorry, this is just because I'm sitting next to you and I'm thinking of it. But the broader point is that
I do appreciate the association very much in that way.
The broader point is, to answer your question, yes, we need development cooperation because it shortens the distance, because lessons can be transferred, and also because in many countries, basic financial contributions from development make the difference for people between life and death.
Can you weigh in on just the ODA question to build on Madame Georgieva's point on this? Beyond the volume, what's your agenda for Canada on ODA? How should it be deployed the most intelligently?
You see, first of all, on the ODA issue, we now have the Feminist international assistance policy from Canada. So it's the very excellent entry point when we are trying to pursue the global objective of leaving no one behind. So it is an excellent entry point to reach out to the vulnerables. But we will have to take a much more granular, disaggregated look, that being with all the women, but all the women are not the same. So you see, I have my Prime Minister and the Speaker of the House who are all women. But at the same time, they have domestic helps. We have the garments workers who are there and exploited in the migrant workers who are not the same equally. The power relationship is different. So I think what is important that when we take this kind of, community or sectoral or class-based approach or group-based approach, we'll have to take a bit more disaggregated look to target our intervention to actually the most deprived, vulnerable, or oppressed within that group in that way. Because that is all what the message is all about, of leave no one behind. That's one issue. But then it also comes in the terms of that whether these people, where they are located. That is also important. The spatial geographical issue is located. We have heard how the conflict countries are increasing and how they are over there. So how we really also address the matrix of the social groups with the geographical boundaries within which we can make those interventions. And the third is the mode of intervention, that whether aid itself is, now it is very well known, is not adequate. It is important, but not sufficient. So how do we leverage and make the interconnection between different domains within which, and we must not forget, these women are there in a world which may have a hostile anti-women systemic situation. I give always the example that the garments worker in my country is in a global value chain who receives pittance as wages in Bangladesh or many other countries for that matter. But is it only the government who are responsible for that, or the global value chain, the buying houses, and in sometimes the consumers within the north, whether they are also participating in a value chain which deprives them from their rightful better wages or not? So I think I will get back again to the issue for Canada to be related to this, that there are very ways of looking at it. You can look at it in a bilateral, regional, and etc. But it is more important at this moment, the world, when the leadership issue is so critical, will Canada complement the leadership vacuum? And you say vacuum is not vacuum always, it is filled in by somebody. Will Canada fill in that vacuum in the multilateral politics, multilateral institutional mechanism over there? Will its ambition level will rise up to that and use its convening power in the global area as a middle power in that sense, and build alliances? And these alliances are not only about the countries in the same level, whether it is the Scandinavian, it's like-minded groups, or other countries over there, or building with the South, or the emerging economies of India, China, Brazil, South Africa, or also building across groups. What Canada gives us the inspiration is that the way it interacts with the government and the non-state actors. The government and the non-state actors and the private sector are in alliance. This is a world where one cannot do it by itself, and big job cannot be done singularly. So the government, along with the NGOs, CSOs, and the private sector and other organizations should come together. So what I'm trying to say in sum is that Canada has the unique opportunity and experience to be really a global player given the vacuum in global leadership at this moment. It has all the endowments, but is it ready to play it? I call it in my terminologies, it is now a reticent global leader, a reluctant middle power. Will it become an aggressive, innovative, inspiring, and influencing global power or not? That is the challenge at this moment. It is waiting for it.
Madam Georgieva wants to get in. Before I give her the floor on this, just to say that we are going to pivot soon to crowdsourcing questions. So if you haven't figured out the Slido app, it's probably too late. But if you have figured it out, start populating it. And I think there are already some questions coming through. So we're going to turn to that in just a minute. So start, I don't know, typing away. Madame Georgieva.
I just wanted to say that as you were speaking towards the end, the faces of all my Canadian friends through the years were kind of flashing through. And I was thinking, well, what is common among them? Well, they're non-assuming and non-intrusive. So you guys need to become a bit more forward-leaning because we need you for that. And I'm saying this from the bottom of my heart. Speak up, raise your head, and connect with the like-minded. I was in Europe for 7 years. There is so much ethical value unity there. There is a lot of ethical value unity with countries in the developing world. Knit it, lift it up, and great things will happen.
I'm now going to delegate our fate to this device, which is going to rank in these crowdsourced questions. The first one from the audience is, if mismanagement is a cause of poverty, does the World Bank recognize its role in allowing nations to collapse in terms of their social safety net programs for the poor? I understand this question essentially to be about the World Bank's policy postures and advice to governments. Kind of how do we reckon with that past, and how do we ensure, probably more importantly, that it's not being replicated today?
Yeah. I mean, it is actually always very interesting to me when I travel around and I talk to people, and I realize that for many, the image of what the World Bank is from the 70s. And that is actually our fault, because we don't do enough to make sure that people know the world has changed, the World Bank has changed. For example, when you think of a World Banker, you usually would imagine somebody in a suit with a tie, Khalil, right there.
Balding.
Maybe. And sort of walking in the high corridors of power. I mean, guess what? Many of our staff members are in very difficult conditions in the field. We recently had in Afghanistan bomb that exploded close to the office. People there go to work with helmets and bulletproof vests. And actually, much more what we do is bottom-up. We learn it from communities with communities. When it comes down to social safety nets, I actually would challenge anyone in this room to say that the World Bank, over the decades, has come up with the most effective, productive safety net programs there are. I think of Ethiopia. I was telling the young leaders this morning, in the 80s, people were hit by a famine. They had to escape walking to neighboring countries, to Eritrea. Today, you go to the same place where famine hit, land management successful, water management successful, community empowerment successful, productive safety net programs, successful decades of the World Bank working with Ethiopia. So I would not accept that we are the reason for safety nets to collapse. On the contrary, in many cases, we are the people who build safety nets. Even more so, we are the people who said, wait a minute, safety net, good, but not good enough. There has to be also safety ropes. Help people to help themselves, to pull themselves out of poverty. Combine social safety nets with entrepreneurship support for SMEs so there can be more vibrant economy. Where we cannot work in that very rare cases when we simply cannot work with the government because the government is not there at all for its people. And giving money would mean throwing money in a big black hole. That happens rarely, but it does happen. And when it happens, what we do is we try to build community engagement programs. I'll give you one example. Remember the 90s, late 90s, that was actually a turning point for the World Bank, I must say. It was under President Jim Wolfenson. We had a government in Indonesia that was not the very best in terms of using public money. There was a lot of corruption. And a World Bank social scientist, who by the way now works in Afghanistan, Scott Guggenheim, created an incredible program of community empowerment. So we would give grants to the government, but to only pass through, they go straight to communities. Kecamatan, these are the smallest structure, it's called Kecamatan. And these Kecamatan grants would have three conditions. One, the community has to decide itself what are their priorities. Is it a road, is it a school, is it a clinic? Two, in the middle of the village of this community, there has to be a whiteboard with the amount of money given, what purpose the money is given for, how much, and who is responsible. Three, the supervision of this bank project would be young, mostly boys on motorcycles, checking only is the board there and is the information accurate. Incredible success, incredible success. It led to major shift in the way we work in places where, unfortunately, corruption is profound. So I don't know who asked the question. I would love to have a follow-up conversation so I can give you a little bit more evidence that we are not your grandfather World Bank.
Dr. Bhattacharya, you want to weigh in on this one?
No, I just wanted to add something, and I do agree that the World Bank has changed over time. We have come out of the lost decade of 1980s or 90s of the structural adjustment programs, and the World Bank has successfully incorporated the lingo into its system. But to what extent it gets reflected into the real-life policies, that's another issue with this, and this is not the subject matter for today. But the issue is that we want a new paradigm to be implemented in this world called SDG 2030 agenda. And we are asking every country, are you fit for purpose? Have you integrated? Have you done the coherence? Have you done the data? Have you done the accountability framework? And you assume that all the global institutions are omnipresent and they are fit for purpose. We all have to change, but those institutions don't have to change. Look at the World Bank, I mentioned that already, governance structure. If you really reflect the global wealth structure in the current era, the World Bank, who would be the owners of the World Bank in that sense? These current owners will be totally marginalized because the growing wealth and assets in the world are now in the South. And the South doesn't have an adequate voice over there. Even the recipients, countries like the low income or LDCs or IDA credit holders, concessional flow, they do not have a proper voice over there. There are executive directors through clusters and represented through bigger groups and et cetera, et cetera. And if you just look at this practice, historical divide of management by two great continents, that it has to be an United States national to be an head and an European in the IMF. In which history we are living in? That you have divided up institutions in certain ways that it reflects the old power structure and the old mindset. And one doesn't want to let go and another cannot come in. So I think if we really mean business in the new world, it has to undergo severe reorganization of the institutional power structures in the world. So you cannot have a new paradigm with old institutions. Everybody has to pull up and do their yoga.
Madam Georgieva, I mean, you should kind of respond, but I mean, but what's your reflection on kind of the process of change?
I agree that we have to lean forward in terms of changing. There has been a shareholder shift a couple of years ago.
Yes.
It created a bit more equality. There has been a very significant managerial shift at the World Bank. I mean, look at the top of the bank. Yes, we have an American president, American-Korean president. That's true, and you know, I'm not going to argue that case. But then we have me, and I'm a Bulgarian national. We have a Chinese and Brazilian at the top of the leadership at the bank. So there has been, I just want to say that change has to be driven further. Completely agree with that. So raise your voices, push. But there is progress made, and we need to build on that progress. We now have a new shareholder review. And you know what is very interesting? China says, we are not in a hurry. We know we are going to get there. So, you know, we move a little bit further. But there are countries that are in a hurry. The really poor part of the world, they're in a hurry. They say, we want to have a fair say. And I can tell you I always take the world in what can I do? What I can do is to make sure that in our management ranks, we look like the world.
The bank should be the world's bank.
I agree. We can shake hands on that.
This actually connects to the next question that we have, which you also can see on the screen in front of you, which is what can Canada do to support leadership in the global south so that people can lead in their own development? I mean, in a sense, this is where you're heading with the global institutions. What is the other kind of agenda that falls out of a commitment to allow the South to really lead their own development? What does that mean?
No, I think that one thing is the real commitment. The second is understanding. And the third is knowledge about it. You see, understanding is quite often not the knowledge. And commitment is not necessarily understanding.
Yes.
So I think this distinction has to be made. Canada at this moment is very 100% on the commitment. I would not rank the other two. Okay? So the issue is that how Canada moves from commitment to understanding to the knowledge and the engagement. So first is that Canada could be a global leader in certain way with its convening power to have a much better interaction with the South. Whether the current president, we love the father very much in our part of the world.
The Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister's father. And we hope he rises to that as well. And the issue is that he should show up much more in the BRICS conference. He should show up in any other non-aligned movement conference and build those bridges which are currently, not only broken, but has been demolished with grenades and landmines. So building those bridges are so critical. So, and Canada is going to have that opportunity very much in the coming days. If Canada is going to be the G7 leader, this is a unique opportunity for Canada to infuse the G7. People don't, I will talk about it in the evening. No, let me hold on to that one.
Yeah, fine.
So,
give the 10-second version.
Yeah, 10-second. That whether will Canada come with an asset or will come with a baggage. I distinguish between baggage and assets. And whether it is, anyway. The second point is that, no, sometimes you can bring one suitcase, you can pay for the second one and then bring in the others. So you can do that. So the issue is that is one. The second issue is that if Canada is going for voluntary national review next year, it is going to, plead its case that it had been the best global citizen, at least in this part of the world. That would be easy. And then you do that. The VNR is a unique opportunity to showcase all these things and show that leadership. In most of the VNRs I have reviewed, 21 last year and 44 this year, and all the OECD countries, they forgot to mention the systemic concerns, the leadership role they're supposed to play in global partnership, and the global partnership not reduced to ODA. I'm not that person reducing everything to ODA. ODA is important. I see the stingy word. I would never utter that. So that is an issue. But at the same time, it will have to talk about the systemic issues, how it is going to handle, whether it is climate, it is trade, it is the humanitarian issues. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming up with great humanitarian assistance for the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Thank you for that. And most importantly, all those things, Canada is eyeing for a seat in the Security Council. I wish it luck, and I want it to be there. And in order to be there, you'll have to broaden the constituency. G7 is important. G20 is more important. G192 is even more important. So you'll have to invest in G192, that is United Nations system. So as we go on this, you broaden the concentric circles of your alliance building, a Canada over there. I'm a too humble a person to say all these things, but since you provoked me, I did share some of my points.
Madam Georgieva, a reflection on the whole issue of leadership of the South and kind of how's the kind of bank kind of dealing with this?
I actually could have not said it better. I agree entirely with the assessment that it is commitment that it comprehends what we are committing to, and that engagement to bring everybody together that reach out. So I was sitting here saying, well, you don't need me for this question. It is all answered.
Can I push us in one particular direction on this, because I'm sensitive that it's easy for us to locate responsibility for all these things in government policy. You've got a room full of people who are leaders in civil society in Canada. Can you help us hold a bit of a mirror up to ourselves as well on this? I mean, if we were serious about this question about ensuring that leadership from the South is genuine, do you have a view as to what agenda it suggests for civil society leaders in Canada who are involved in global development questions? Kind of what are the promise and peril of this?
No, the issue is I think my colleagues are much more competent to respond to these things, but from my own experience, who has moved from the quintessential research to a policy activist and activism. So my experience tells me that getting your leaders commit to your ideals or share your ideals is only least of the battle. It's much more important to get them delivered. And delivery means constant vigilance. It's constant vigilance, monitoring, mobilization, watchdog function. These are so critical in this world. And now that this role has now been recognized and a space has been created now also within the global leadership and in the global paradigm, that we need that vigilance, we need that role of the non-state actors, the civil society people and others over there is very important. The number 2 point would be is that in order to play that role, capacity is also important. Whether the civil society institutions really they have the capacity to deal with this new role. I am urging, nudging the global institutions to develop their capacity. It is equally true for the civil society, to create new capacity, to have new innovative capacity, which can influence and inspire in the new task which we have in the hands. Quite often, civil society is quite good in terms of criticizing or that vigilance role, but it is not necessarily always they can play the proactive role in terms of building those bridges and doing the constructive work and in delivering. So that part of that role, the new paradigm looks from the civil society. The new capacity has to match the new demands on the civil society, what we are putting in. So the civil society should not be complacent, should be more self-critical, build solidarity, and also address their own malfunctions as they have at the same society. It is time for introspection too, for the civil society as well.
I have a very concrete recommendation to this group. You work in developing countries. How many of you actually work in developing countries or with developing countries? Raise your hands. Many in this room. Every day ask yourself, what have I done to help capacity to be built locally. That it is not us to come and bring assistance, but we help people to help themselves. In the humanitarian world, we set up a target that 25% of humanitarian aid budgets should go through local organizations. We are far from reaching this target. Ask yourself, what have I done to get there? We are so privileged to live in countries where civil society is vibrant, has voice, but there are so many places where people do not have access to these high corridors of power. I grew up in a country under communism. It wasn't quite the open society you have here in Canada, I can tell you. And I know that in many places I go to, organizations are struggling to have the skills, the management capabilities, the fundraising capabilities. It is your duty to help them succeed. Think of your projects. Is your project really empowering local people? And then set a target to go further. And then account towards this target. Thank you for giving me a chance to say that.
No, thank you. The next question is around Canada's Feminist International Assistance Policy. You've both received it with welcome. Can you say a word about what it is going to require to implement it? The policy has now been announced. I think everyone in this room, and I can say, I think with equal force, both civil society and the senior leaders of the government are now tackling the challenge of what it would require to implement it. What advice do you have about where the focus should be on the implementation challenges associated with this new orientation?
I mean, I would say you have to structure it in stretched but achievable bites. And then you have to have an implementation in which you can actually demonstrate progress is being made. And then you have to stand tall and talk about it to everybody and take pride of what you have done. And I think, if I'm you, I would think success is with the level of infection that comes from it for others to be mobilized. And it is one of these areas where now that you announced it, can I give you a piece of news? You cannot be half pregnant on this one. You actually have to deliver. This is why the targets.
Not use a family planning metaphor, but.
Well, but I mean, it is. I love what you have done, yeah. And it is very exciting for so many. But people would watch. What is actually being done that is different, that is more? Are you putting your money where your mouth is? Do we see improvements in the lives of girls and women everywhere because you embrace this policy? So go.
And can we push you on this? So if you had one or two pieces of concrete advice with respect to how, what the machinery might look like, the first or two or three things to do?
I think it is absolutely paramount that you concentrate on family planning as an area that is so underfunded and so critically important. In other words, make some concrete areas your areas. And I would also concentrate a lot on what you achieve in terms of setting up the example of feminist decision-making beyond the Canadian borders. We have to see Canadians working in countries so there are more women in parliament, that you support civil society to get women in local, in positions of authority at local level. And then you can say, here is my program, and here is how in country X, the women in government at high level, municipal level, parliament, they were that many, and now they're more. And you have to show that this is happening, because people would be more, I mean, you know the old story that success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. You would know whether you're succeeding if others are joining feminist development policy. Success breeds success. But you have to demonstrate that things are different. I have my executive director, a woman, one of the very few on the board of executive directors at the World Bank. Makes a difference. She is calling on the other women to come together at the bank, at the board and management. Makes a difference. It is the concrete actions that show that no more we are going to tolerate this gap to exist. Count them, show them, talk about them. And of course, have your Prime Minister do what he does so well, to be a feminist.
Dr. Bhattacharya.
Yesterday, I spent a fantastic day in the Global Affairs Canada discussing particularly this issue, teasing out what are the works to be done, the next steps. Let me just recall a couple of them. I have already mentioned one in my earlier interventions, that feminist policy is good, but all women are not the same. So one will have to take a disaggregated look, a granular look at what part of the women folks we are going to target and in which context. Because these vulnerabilities differ from context to context. So one will have to pick up the most one within that particular country context. This is one particular area. Number two, let me piggy ride on the population control issues. Now, if you think population control issues is over there, what we need to see is what we call interconnectivity. That is the connections between different domains and how they interact with that. Bangladesh is a very unsung successful story of population control.
Yes.
I'm also embarrassed for the current number, but still, we have brought it down. When we were with Pakistan, we were 3% population growth rate. Now Pakistan remains 2 point something, and we have brought it down to 1.3. So we know that we have a very successful case of population control. But what really happened? Is it that the people of the family planning people who are going around distributed contraceptives? Yes, it was important, but not all of it. The most important thing was women participating in the labor force. It is the women who are able to access the market to produce and sell at the best possible prices. It was about sending their children to the schools and having the possibly good maternal health care over there. It was important for them also to have electricity. I mentioned that to somebody. The single largest contribution to fertility reduction was electricity. Think about it. I let you think about it. And you see, this is the issue, that interconnection.
This is a family event.
I'm fully aware of that. And it will be a video and my family will see it too. So and my point is that the interconnection. The number three is that we'll have to work out the indicators, because where is the assessment framework? Against what targets we are going to see them? Yes. And for that you will need new data. Which is the data, investment in data will be so critical on that. My final point on this is that it is Canada which has said that this is how we want to proceed. It will also has to check out how the countries, or the recipient countries, want to proceed. So how you will really match the demand side with the supply side, and how it will come together, and what type of institutional discussion platform will be created to have those discussions to match the demand and the supply, and have a maximum optimization of all the constraints and variables which we have.
Well, thank you both for that. We're in our dying minutes of our session together. I want to give you both an opportunity to have and offer any final reflections to this group as we proceed with another day and a half of deliberations. You've indulged both my sole source questions as well as the crowdsource questions. Let's give you now an opportunity, just of your own account. If there's one or two things you want us to leave with as we embark on these deliberations, we'd love to receive Dr. Bhattacharya.
No, it's the best of the time, it is worst of the times. That's the tale of two cities. It's the tale of two worlds at this moment. How we are going to really balance them. So on the one hand, we have great expectations, but we are also realists. We know the constraints within which all is going to happen. And so we have to avoid disappointment. We will have to also do our things in the right way with right commitments and others. But having said that, I would not say that our dreams should be limited by the constraints. And here I again come with you on the optimism over that. And going to Canada, again, I can only, quote from Great Expectations, Charles Dickens on that. That we love you, notwithstanding all the reasons, notwithstanding against all hopes, against all promises, against all happiness, against all these arguments. So we love you, Canada, and be there for us as well. Thank you.
Madame Georgieva, a final, even less literary view.
Two final points. One is that from the World Bank side, I just want to promise you that we would do our bit to work with you so you are successful. On the feminist strategy, there was a question what we can do to help with the agenda strategy of the bank to support you in moving it forward. We can help with the data, create framework for accountability, make sure that we build it bottom up so there is prioritization that is helpful. So my promise to you on that is you're not alone. We are in this together. And my second point, I shared it, and apologies to the young leaders, I shared it in the morning, but I think it is a very important point to reflect on. We are now in a world where everybody knows everything about everybody else. Technology is unbelievably powerful to bring us all together. And it is a very fast-moving world. Would you let me share an anecdote?
Please.
Okay. Here is my anecdote. In 2010, when I left the World Bank, my colleagues gave me a very jazzy, sexy present. They queued for it for 48 hours, and it was an iPad. And last year, I was talking to my granddaughter about life when I was her age, 5, and I said we didn't have TV, we didn't have computers, so she looks up at me and says, so you only had iPads? And I'm telling you this story because in this fast-moving world of ours, in which we all can see what is happening everywhere, we do have that incredible convergence of aspirations of people. And yet, inequality has grown. The divergence of opportunity has grown. But it need not to be like this. We actually can make it so that aspirations and opportunities are aligned. And that would happen with your leadership. So, what was Nike? Just do it.
Well, Madame Georgieva, Dr. Bhattacharya, it remains to me only to thank you for the generosity of your time, for your insight, for your wit, and for your affection for Canada and for this group here, and for your offers of collaboration. I think that really is what we will take away most from this, and we are grateful that you've given us such a wonderful way to start and launch our deliberations. So thank you very much. Please join me.
Thank you.